Twice a year, Huthwaite conducts what we call a Global Sales Pulse Survey. This survey generally has about 5,000 participants that participate each 6 months. Many of you may have participated in our Global Sales Pulse Survey before. Just to give you a point of comparison, 5,000 is 30% more participation than the whole of the research that went into the Challenger model from the Sales Executive Council. So it's a significant amount of research that's happening every 6 months, trying to tap into the minds of both sales leaders and sales executives, as well as business executives. And some interesting things began to emerge recently. I'm drawing from our Global Sales Pulse Survey of 2012, and be sharing with you some intra-year shifts. In 2011 and 2012, we started to see quite a shift that was occurring in how long buyers were waiting until they engaged with the live salesperson. Now, we first spotted this trend in 2005. We were one of the very first when we published an article in Harvard Business Review about the end of sales and marketing as we know it. And we said that these worlds were converging and that social media would have a tremendous impact on both sales and marketing. And in 2011, that trend really accelerated. In 2012, we saw really people bringing their consumer behaviors into the B2B world. And for a long time, those who were in the B2B sale, even today there's probably still some resistors, were holding on to the notion that if you're in the B2B sale, it's very different from the B2C, and therefore I can cling to some of my traditional ways of selling, be it relationship or whatever. But you have to remember that while every consumer is not a business executive, every executive is a consumer. And so it can be a bit naive to consider the fact that these people are going to have one pattern for buying in their personal purchases and not somehow bring that into their professional purchases. If we look at the data up here, the first data point I'd like to share with you is that the respondents that reported that they were waiting longer in their buying process to engage a seller shifted from 35% in Q2 to 41%. Now, Forrester put out a survey recently to say that 70% of the buying process is complete, according to the people that they surveyed. The Corporate Executive Board has that number a little bit lower, 57%. So whether you call it 57 or 70%, we're talking somewhere 2/3 of the buying process is complete in the corporate buying world before they're engaging a live seller. And this is showing that in just 6 months, there were more people joining that category of people who were waiting to call a live seller to get information. The next data point I wanted to share with you is the number of buyers who report use of social media in their buying process. A shift from 24% to 34%. Now, while this is 10 points, it actually represents a 40% uptick in this category. So a significant change in just 6 months of people saying we're using social media to better understand and make good decisions, which also might explain the shift that we're seeing in that first data point. One interesting point I'll share with you on this study comes from the sales organization and sales leaders saying that they're finding that business acumen is becoming an increasingly important part of their role. Here in Q2, already a high number at 79%, moving in Q4 into the mid-80s. Now, why would that be? Why would business acumen hit the radar of these respondents in this kind of manner? Well, it's probably best described and explained by the two previous facts, which say if buyers are waiting 2/3 or before they engage with the seller, then a lot of the corporate information that a seller would provide, a lot of the product information that a seller would provide, is already discovered, has already been hashed out with colleagues and peers in the industry or around the world. So by the time they contact a seller, that buyer is probably looking not for product and company information, but more for commercial information. How can the seller and the seller solution have business impact? How can they support that buyer's business drivers? How can they have or help the buyer measuring their return on investment? Those are things that require a level of business acumen. And it's a conversation that's very foreign to a lot of salespeople who are very comfortable in their world of talking about products and their business. If we take a look now at social media and the upheaval that's been occurring in the past 2 years, some significant statistics. LinkedIn is now reporting 225 million members. They were founded in 2002, and it took 9 years to get the first 100 million. It took just 18 months to double that to 200 million. And now they add 2 members every second of the day, every day of the year. Twitter claims that 181,000 users have social media in their bio. Very interesting statistic, considering that in 2009, that number was only 16,000. So a growth of tenfold. Clearly a burgeoning industry, an area of interest from the population. Weibo, which is China's Twitter, has twice as many users as Twitter, and reports that 1 out of every 5 people in China that's on the internet is active on Weibo. They claim that 200 million people are active on Twitter every month. This is 3% of the world's population, so it's not a small number at all. Now, if I can tweet every thought that comes to mind and my stream of consciousness goes out on Twitter, does that make me an effective social seller? Well, we think not. There's an interesting study that comes from e-marketing that says 33% of the US internet users claim to have ended a relationship with a brand or a business because of too many posts, too many status updates, and just the barrage of information. So clearly there are some best practices that we need to embrace in social selling. And clearly there are some ineffective practices that we want to learn and we want to avoid to be effective social sellers. Well, I'd like to turn now to a report that we look at every year at Huthwaite. In October of each year, the Sales Management Association puts out a report that studies sales leaders, sales ops folks, and business executives. In this report, the respondents said 96% of themselves participate very actively on LinkedIn. 6 hours a week, on average, they're spending on LinkedIn. 80% of the respondents claim that their sales force would be more productive if they embraced some of these social media platforms. We see more than half of them with the expectation, the forecast that they will increase their engagement with several social media platforms. And yet, 2/3 of the respondents, which is, there are 140 firms that participated in this survey, 2/3 of those said there is no social media strategy in place for the sales organization. Now, what kind of problems could that lead to? Well, let's first look at penetration of social media in Asia. The 24 countries here represented by this study comes, or this data comes from a Singapore-based firm called We Are Social, and they track social media usage. And they've just recently recalibrated how they study users. Rather than just users of social media, it's really more of the active users of social media. This has to do with penetration in each of the markets of social media. Asia, represented here by the blue line in the center, is pretty consistent with the global average, 23%. Singapore sits over here much higher at 50% penetration by social media. Now you'd expect that in a smaller market like Hong Kong, Singapore, markets that are more mature. But you have to ask the question, if a business has not formulated a social media strategy, if salespeople are not clear about how they can best engage in social selling using social media, are they missing critical opportunities to connect with and influence buyers? We think the answer to that is yes. The problem can be represented here in that most of formalized social media efforts are focused up here on the top with the marketing, PR, and comms groups, really the vast majority, and its sales doesn't hit until way down here at 11%. So much of what a corporation is focusing on in terms of its social media efforts, again, are focused on marketing, not sales. The problem is exacerbated by the fact that salespeople are not receiving adequate training. Going back to the Sales Management Association survey, here we see that an overwhelming majority, 68%, as represented in the green parts right here, claim, when asked the question, have you received sufficient training to help you use social media? They said no. Coming to the conclusion that really salespeople do not have sufficient training and have a general lack of understanding about social media. Well, the implication of that can be represented here. Now, this data comes from Altimeter Group, which is a Silicon Valley, California-based firm. This is looking at the levels of satisfaction on different levels that social media can impact. And if you look at the top up here, brand positioning, brand awareness, these are areas that marketing would generally be most interested in. When you think about what are salespeople interested in? Well, salespeople like to have incoming leads. They like those leads to be warm, and they like those leads to buy from them as soon as possible. It's the shortest path from today to revenue, and from revenue to commissions. So those are the things that social media, or that sellers would really be looking for from social media. And yet, down here we see fairly low level rankings, or actually high levels of dissatisfaction in this category. Now, left unchecked, what we could end up with is a world of buyers that are looking for insights about various companies, various products, various solutions, and a sales world that would, in a traditional mode, be very equipped to provide those insights, but in today's world are increasingly finding themselves incapable or ill-equipped to engage and influence those buyers in that first 57, 60 some odd, 70% of the buying process. Now, why does it matter? Well, I can tell you that that might depend on your functional role in your organization. About a third of you here today are CEOs, MDs, country managers, top executives in your business. About a third of you are from the marketing organization, digital marketing managers, regional heads of marketing, and the other third are from the sales function, all the way from frontline sellers who are quite interested in improving their social selling skills, on up to regional heads of sales. And I could argue that regardless of which of those functions you come from, whether it's executives, marketing, sales, all of those groups should be interested in customers, revenue, high performance. Well, this study here is one of my favorites. It comes from Aberdeen Group, which is a fantastic research firm. And they claim to be the research firm that represents the end user, and they try to catch buyers in action as they're making decisions. Millions subscribe to their research on everything from business intelligence to sales effectiveness and sales strategy. And at Huthwaite, we quite like some of the data that they come out with. Here we see some empirical data that says, from Aberdeen Group, those users of social media who embrace social selling have a higher team attainment of quota. Those of you who are managers or business executives, whom among you would not want that result? Customer renewal rates higher. Sales forecast accuracy higher. Is there anybody in here who heads up a sales team who would not like to see higher sales forecast accuracy? And a higher percent of sales reps achieving quota. Now, I'm a managing director, but I grew up through the sales and sales management rank, and over the past 20 years, I can't think of a single time that I wouldn't have wanted to see 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of these with my team and with myself. Just quickly, anecdotally, I'll share with you that when I shared this data within my organization, there was one seller in particular who was not a big fan of social media and social selling. Had a lot of misconceptions about it. But when he saw the data, he said, I don't want to be in that green category. I have to find a way to get into the blue category. So he pushed aside his misconceptions about social media. He got involved in several platforms, and he got in the game. He was, for the first 2-3 years of his employment at Huthwaite, a solid performer, but always maybe just hovering at or below quota. This year, now that he's embraced social selling, he is exceeding and leading the team and above quota. So I think causation or correlation, difficult to say, but clearly in one seller's case, he found, as thousands of people have done in that blue category, that social selling provides a seller with an opportunity to engage in a sales process as collaborative and dynamic as the modern day buying process. It allows them to connect with buyers, to find cross-sell opportunities, and to really build their own personal brand and their careers.